Good morning, Todd.
Morning, Janelle. How are you?
Very good. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Murphy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioner Foster.
Good morning, Janelle.
Thank you. We hear you. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Hovell.
Morning, Janelle.
We hear you loud and clear.
That's good. Thank you.
President Hubble, I will have one comment before the commission approves the consent calendar.
Thank you, Michael, for letting me know.
Good morning, Commissioner Eskridge.
Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioner Meyer. Good morning, Commissioner Wilson.
Hello. How's life?
Good, good. We hear you well.
I like that.
Morning, Janelle. This is Ezra. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Great.
Commissioner Hubble, the full commission is in attendance now.
Yeah, I just noticed that with Tom getting on. Okay, it's 8 o'clock. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to all of our guests. Janelle, do you want to go through the virtual meeting guidance, please?
Certainly. Good morning, commissioners, members of the public and staff. Welcome to our October 15th commission meeting. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just 2 decorum rules we ask that you please follow. Number 1, please ensure your mic is muted unless you are speaking. And number 2, please state your name before speaking and also the entity or organization you are with. Thank you so much for your assistance, and let's have a great meeting.
Thank you, Janelle. Michael, you had one announcement.
I just wanted to make one announcement for the consent calendar, item 3E, the piping project acceptance of the work. It's outlined in the report, but I wanted to bring to the commission's attention and oversight that we made on the final payment. Final payment was $10,000, and that payment was made in September before the commission accepted and approved it, which you're doing today. And that was we pushed the meeting schedule out for this approval, and our staff was being efficient and made the final payment. There were no issues with this contract. The work went smoothly, but I wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Any appearances by a member of the public? Anyone from the public wish to speak? Okay, hearing none, we'll move to the consent calendar, which has items 3A through 3H. It includes sewer extension plans approval, East Side Growth Area, McFarland approval of expedited annexation, the West Interceptor, Shorewood Relief, that work that Michael was just talking about, cash statements for operating and capital, and the approval of the digester cleaning along with the minutes from the last meeting. Do we have any questions on any of the items before we get a motion? Okay, hearing no questions, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
It's Wilson. I would move approval of the consent calendar items.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by,
This is Commissioner Bookland. I'll second it.
okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by Commissioner Bookland to approve the consent calendar, items 3A through 3H. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. Okay, motion carries. That takes us to item 4, the approval of third quarter sewer service charges. We got some information yesterday. Todd, do you want to give your report on this?
Yes, thank you, President Howell. This is Todd Giebert, Capital Planning Engineer for the district. Hopefully everyone can see my screen here. Yes?
Yes, Todd.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you. So today I'd like to report on and request approval for the third quarter sewer service charges. As everyone knows, this has been a hot topic ever since March when the pandemic first started. And there's good news and bad news for the third quarter service charges. The bad news is we are still well below budget for the third quarter, like previous quarters. The good news is we had planned for this, and the third quarter results are pretty much in line with what we had been projecting for the 2021 budget. So overall, I think we're in good shape. So with that, third quarter charges were $9,945,484. As I mentioned, that's about $437,000 below the third quarter budget. And you'll see here in the middle of the screen, the difference by quarter. They've all been really stable. So that suggests a couple of different things. One, that we haven't had a lot of extreme weather this year. So revenues have been fairly stable. And also it suggests that the pandemic is having obviously a very stable but predictable effect also on our revenues. So for the year to date then, we are about $1.3 million below budget. And if you go down to the bottom line here and look at our 2020 budget estimate, we are now estimating that we'll have $39.4 million in actual revenues, which is below the $41.3 million that we had budgeted by about 1.9 million. So this is the amount that's shown in the 2021 budget. We just our Jet Brockett did a revised estimate just recently, and that number might be closer now to 2 million. But we're very much in line, and we don't think there's any reason to adjust the 2021 budget based on the third quarter results. So this slide shows a running total of service charge revenue. We did take the unprecedented step this year of tracking daily service charge revenues due to the pandemic. And so you can see that it's been a very gradual but steady decline in revenues since the Safer at Home order went into effect in mid-March. There was a little period in June and July when revenues maybe flattened out a little bit. But now in the last couple of months, they are starting to decline at about the same rate as during the Safer at Home order, which again suggests a couple of things. little bit wetter weather in June and July, but also our revenues seem to be tracking with the conditions in Wisconsin and Dane County about the pandemic, where things are starting in June and July, things were starting to open up. Our revenues got a little better. Now in the last 2 months, conditions are changing with the pandemic, and so are our revenues. So breaking down the third quarter results by billing parameter, comparing actual to budgeted revenues, you see all the measured parameters are well below budget, with CBOD and solids being the two most so. Surprisingly, the volume is not, it typically drives revenues one way or the other. This quarter has been fairly stable. And looking at the same comparison for the year to date, it's kind of the same story. All the measurable parameters are down. I will point out the two that are not, the fixed parameters, which are equivalent meters and actual customers, are actually above budget slightly. And to me, that suggests that we are still seeing growth in our service area and new development. This also falls in line with what we've seen in our connection charge revenues this year. So even though the pandemic is certainly having an effect on flows to the plant and loads, development still is ongoing in Dane County and in our service area. And then just looking at daily flows to the plant to better understand what's going on with volume this year. As I mentioned before, even though we're about 4 or 5 inches ahead on rainfall for the year, flows have been really pretty stable. We had a little bit of a spike in July we had about 4 inches of rain in the first couple of weeks in July, but since then they've kind of trailed off, and we expect that to continue through the end of the year. So far, flows to the plant have been about 43.1 million gallons per day, and budgeted was 44.5 million gallons per day. So everything else being equal, if the pandemic were not in effect, I think we would be very close to our budget revenue for flow. And I'd like to wrap up today just by talking about one capital project that's having a significant impact on our user charge program right now, and will for several quarters to come. This picture is of our meter vault room in the Headworks building. And as you'll recall, in our capital improvements plans for the last couple of years, we've had a project called flow metering improvements to lower the force mains in the meter vault room to improve the performance of the downstream screening units. So what you're looking at is 5 large pipes that carry the flow from our pump stations directly to the plant. All the flow comes in is pumped, none comes by gravity. So the problem is we are continuously sampling and measuring flow in this room for user charge billing. So it's really hard to lower these pipes without doing something with the flow in the meantime. So not only do these pipes have to be lowered in that room, they also have to be lowered outside the building for significant distance upstream. So what you're looking at here is the first force main that was lowered. It's our pump station 11 force main. And the part that needs to be lowered, they're doing it right here where it bends upwards. What they're doing is they're installing something called a line stopping machine. And it is what the name implies. First, they cut a hole, and on the right side, you're seeing the worker cutting a hole into the pipe. And the beauty of this is they can do it while the pipe is in service. There's no need to take it out of service and break the pipe apart. They can do it all and maintain service. So cutting a hole in the pipe, then on the left side, they next take a line stop or a plug. They insert it down this shaft and block the flow right about where the worker is standing here. And then once that is inserted, the flow comes up and out this hole in the pipe into a bypass line. Next slide will show what that looks like. The bypass line, once the plug is inserted, the flow will run around the work site and enter the Headworks building where these ladders are over by the building. Then this allows the new pipe to be lowered, and you see it being the new pipe being installed here in the trench. And then the picture on the right just shows the amount that the pipe was lowered, about 4 feet in this case. Moving on to the next slide then, this is again back in the meter vault room. I talked about the bypass line. So what we did is we put a temporary flow meter in and a temporary sampling station. So we never had a disruption in service. We're always continuously sampling and measuring the flow from pump station 11. And now this pipe, the force main from pump station 11 is now dry and can be taken out of service and lowered. So in the end, it looks like this. On the left, again, is what it looked like before. And on the right is what it looks like now. So it seems like a simple thing just to lower it 4 feet, but a tremendous amount of work went into this, not only from the contractor, but all district staff, including the project engineer, mechanics, operators, electricians, all had a role in making sure that we had continuous service and good billing all throughout the project. So we just started this actually. We're moving on to the second force main now. Contractor will temporarily walk away from the project during the winter months because it's outside work, and then resume the remaining 3 force mains in 2021. So with that concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Todd?
One quick one from Commissioner Meyer here.
Go ahead, Ezra.
First off, that looks like a great project with the force main lowering. Good work to all involved on that. Todd, it's a bit of a sort of nitty gritty nuts and boltsy question, but you made me think of it when you talked about, I guess you noted how the 2 fixed charges or fixed parameters, the actual customers and the meters, connected meters, went up a little bit. I just made me wonder, how do we track that? Are we asking our customer communities every quarter to report to us if they have new actual customers and new meter connections, or is there some other way that we glean that information by way of an estimate? How do we sort of know that number in order to bill on those 2 parameters?
Yes, that's a good question. You're exactly right. We do reach out to all our customer communities every quarter for updates on those meter and customer accounts. And that's information they have readily available because they report that to the PSC as well. So it's a little bit of an effort, but it's well worth doing.
Great. No, thanks a lot. That helps. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have a question?
Commissioner Foster.
Go ahead, Grant.
Thank you. So just wanted to ask a little bit about the drops we've seen that kind of pandemic related. I mean, it seems logical that a lot of that is related to fewer people coming into the service area for work or recreation, et cetera, that are likely then not just staying at home, but staying at home outside of our service area. Can you just, I guess, speak to what we know about that? Is that 100% of what we're seeing in terms of the reductions? Have there been impacts to industrial users? Are there anything else going on? And just trying to, I guess, think about what this might mean for the future. Not, I think we're all hoping and assuming that we get out of this at some point, but we got a really interesting presentation at the Metropolitan Planning Organization a month ago about potential trends with kind of work from home, and that it seems like there's a real possibility that things don't maybe ever go back to normal in terms of some of the commuting patterns, et cetera. So just trying to anticipate if we might need to expect some of these changes to be even longer lasting than the pandemic itself.
Yes, that's a great point about the future is a big unknown right now. I guess what we know just from the measured data that we have, there was a big impact in our Pump Station 2 area, which is basically downtown Madison. We've definitely seen a drop there. So obviously that's a large employment hub, and that makes sense. Other things we know, we have reached out to a lot of our industrial customers through our pre-treatment coordinator. It's very informal, but it's kind of a mixed bag, but I would say maybe a third of the industries have reported a dramatic slowdown, with the remaining the first couple of months of the pandemic were hard on them, but they have kind of ramped back up. As far as commuting patterns, we haven't really noticed a shift or a large increase in flows in residential areas one way or the other. So I think it is probably a lot of what you say is that the residential has probably stayed more or less stable. I think where the other drop is occurring is probably commercial establishments, the restaurants, and that's where a lot of our loads come from as well, the food service industry. So I would say all those things together are kind of the things that I have seen.
Great. Yeah, it'll be interesting to try and keep an eye on that. And I guess just also kind of related to Commissioner Meyer's question, if to the degree that some of these shifts might be longer lasting, I wonder if there's any value in just revisiting some of the decisions around how we're covering our costs as it relates to the fixed charges versus the the volume changes. I mean, if this is again longer lasting, I mean, do we think it's appropriate to essentially shift that burden more towards the fixed charge side of things? So just something to maybe think about for a future discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Or we have to just change our loading levels to a different size. I do think that things are going to be changing. I've got a son that he works up in Minneapolis, but he was interviewing for some positions with the firm he works for, and they're interviewing people from the East and West Coast on the idea that they won't have to come to Minneapolis to the main office. They could stay at their place, and that they might show up for like a week or a few days once COVID is over, you know, a few days every year just to get into, you know, get to know them better. But so that company actually is looking at more stay at home or continuing stay at home even after the pandemic. Okay, so anybody else have any questions? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the third quarter sewer service charges?
Happy to make that motion, Commissioner Meyer.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Meyer, second by,
Second, Commissioner Clark.
okay, motion by Commissioner Meyer, second by Commissioner Clark. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None, motion carries. That will take us to the deliberation and direction on the operating budget for 2021 and the debt service budgets. Michael, you're going to lead this off.
Yes, good morning, commissioners and members of the public. I'm Michael Muka. Just a very short summary. The budget was available to the public on September 10th when we presented the proposed budget to the commission. Commission conducted a public hearing on September 24th, and then the budget was presented to the Dane County City and Villages Association on September 30th. Since the public hearing, I have not received any written or verbal comments on the budget. At the Dane County City and Villages Association, there were a few questions, but there was general support for the commission's decision to move more towards cash financing over time. And President Hubble was at that meeting, and you may have other comments about what you heard as well. The total budget is $45.4 million, and that includes the operating, capital, and debt service budgets, and that is a 2.1 million increase in new service charges revenue needed, which is overall a 5.2% increase, although the overall expenditures are about 4.5% increase. As Todd Giebert indicated, the good news is our revenues are on track with projections that were made way back in August in terms of what we expect to receive in revenues, and we'll just be down about $150,000 from what we projected in August, which is extremely minor and could easily be outweighed by changes in our expenditures, which we're also still in a saving mode. So with that, I'll just turn it back over to the commission. This is a chance for the commission to provide final guidance to staff in preparation for adoption of the three budgets on October 29th. President Hubble.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think Michael did a good job at that meeting, and he explained the situation that arose at the beginning of the year, which was caused by the wet weather and cold weather in October, November, December, for which we adjusted the budget, and then explained how that impacted us, how we amended the budget, and then of course he explained the whole COVID situation and the effects on loadings, things like that. So the budget they understood. I think many of them are probably going through the same type of thing in other parts of their utilities. So does anybody have any items for Michael in terms of the budget that you would want him or want the budget to be taken in more detail or examined or more information or changes? Okay, I don't hear anyone. So Michael, I think the budget is good to go at this point. I was just wondering if we could get a kind of a summary sheet of where, of what was savings, what's actually then being borrowed from in at the end of the year or early next year, I guess I should say, what's being borrowed from reserves to offset losses, what was saved from budget this year, you know, from cutbacks and things. That might be helpful for us.
Okay, I can do that, Commissioner.
Yeah, it's just something simple. Okay, so nothing on the 2021 operating capital or debt service budgets. Then we'll move to Bill Walker, who's going to talk about the amendments on the policy book relative to owners, partners, and stakeholders.
Good morning, Bill Walker, Director of Strategy and Planning. Please confirm for me that you are seeing my screen.
See it, Bill?
Yes.
We're good.
You got it.
So I am here to hopefully wrap up this discussion on ownership under policy governance. We took what you said at the meeting 2 meetings ago on this topic, did a little interpretation of it, and have come back with some recommended changes to the commission policy book. You've seen those changes in the agenda report, and I'll put them on the screen here in a minute. But first, I want to reorient us to the question of what ownership means under policy governance. And it helps me to think about this word with the following story. An organization of some kind is created by some persons for some purpose. And all three of those words are in quotes because they're not sharply defined. This is a story, not a proof. The people who create that organization are naturally very interested in its performance. They want it to achieve the purpose they set for it. So they would like to monitor that performance. But they can't because there are too many of them, or they're too busy, or they don't have expertise, some reason. So they ask a board to do the monitoring for them. When John Carver and the policy governance people talk about ownership, this is the idea they have in mind. These persons are the owners, and the board is serving them in a monitoring capacity. Now, of course, there are a lot of other people who are interested in the performance of this organization, and under policy governance, they're given the generic term stakeholders. We're going to add a second nuanced term to that in just a moment. But the point of all this is that owners under policy governance have higher priority because of this creation for a purpose story. So with that background, I'm going to recap what we think you said 2 meetings ago. First of all, you agreed that our owners are what we're now calling owner communities, meaning those municipalities with authority to appoint the commission. And you emphasize that this appointment authority creates a natural line of authority, statutory based, which is very clear. And Commissioner Foster pointed out that these communities fit with the creation for a purpose story that I just told. Think back to the late 1920s when the then village of Middleton decided that it was going to make its own wastewater system to solve its individual wastewater problem, discharging into Lake Mendota. The city of Madison and the State Board of Health intervened, and the result was the district. a collective solution to a bunch of individual municipal problems. So with that settled, the discussion moved on to other groups with an interest in performance. You started with the word customer, giving some examples like sanitary districts which do not have appointment authority, people who participate in the Biosolids program. And we're suggesting the broader term partner, because that can include commercial relationships, vendors, contractors, can include Biosolids program participants. It can also include strategic partners, like for instance, the Saltwise partnership or partnerships we might have with individual municipalities or nonprofits. You emphasize very strongly that these interests are important to you. You want them to be paid attention to. And the point we added is that, and the reason we're using this separate word instead of just stakeholder, is these folks can communicate their interest to the district. That's what a partnership is. It's people getting together and talking about, what do we want to do together? How are we going to do it? And that leaves the even more general concept of stakeholder. You were very clear that these interests are important. And in your discussion, you highlighted interests that come from our mission, environment, public health, and so on. And it was nice to find out that when you take a look at the other outcomes policies that we've already established, the interests you mentioned and more besides are already reflected in those outcomes. So this is what we heard. Let's assume for the moment that we got it correct. And I'll go through how we're trying to capture that in policy changes. We are proposing two changes, one to the global outcome policy, one to a process policy, and then permission to do some minor edits. The change to the global outcome is this: blue is existing text, red is new. And what we're proposing here is to replace the term district customers with owner communities and define it as an appointment authority and leave the rest of this outcome alone. So that's straightforward. That's the easy part. The changes to the process policy are a little more involved. This policy already exists, and it's the one that addresses what to do, what the commission will do when there are conflicting interests. And that policy already has a list of steps that you would go through. We would leave those alone, but add a paragraph making these 3 points. First, when interests do conflict, the commission would prioritize owner communities. That's, of course, the whole point of this exercise, is to get that result. It would also make it very clear that it's important to you to consider partner interests, and then would note that those are expressed through the partnership. And then last, it would make it clear that it's important to you to consider stakeholder interests, particularly those that are already reflected in outcomes policies. I can put the text for these changes on the screen later if you would like. And then for completeness, we're also asking for permission to make changes throughout the policy book to use these 3 terms consistently, as long as we don't change any other meanings. So to summarize, what we're recommending is that you adopt this resolution. I've put the keywords here on the screen. And that is all I have to say. The question really is now for you. Did we catch your intent correctly? If not, can we fix it with a friendly amendment right here? And if not, can you give us direction and we can come back with another try? I will turn it back to you, President Hovell. I'd be glad to go over any of this again, or put, as I said, the text of CP2N on the screen. But other than that, I will sit quietly and listen to the discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bill. Anybody have any opinion? My feeling is that they have captured what the commission had discussed, but I'm willing to see if anybody else has different thoughts, obviously. So does anybody have any other opinion?
Commissioner Swanson,
Go ahead, Mary.
I just wanted to say that this all makes really good sense to me. And yeah, I think it sounds good.
Okay, anyone else?
Wilson, if I can. Yeah, I think this is good. I did just have one question, and that was there is it's like on page well, it says it's page 160. I don't know what that must be of our packet. Yeah. And it's attachment 1 to global outcomes policies, and it says, this is a CED interpretation of who the owner communities include. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but the way I'm looking at this, the statutory definition of what of who should be encompassed here, I think we might be missing the town of Middleton. I know they don't pay.
I'm going to jump in here. Thank you for catching that. Todd Gebert and I caught that yesterday, and I thought I would gloss over it since it's a CED interpretation issue and we can correct it. But yes, I agree with you. We'll think a little bit more carefully to make sure we're right. But they meet the definition. They're in our service area. They're a municipality. They're a town specifically. And never mind that we don't send them a bill. They fit the definition.
Yeah, and like I said, from my perspective, I think they were the one that voted against me being appointed, and I remember seeing that they didn't get a bill, wondering why they even had a vote. But when I'm looking at the definition in the statute and I see that they're not included here, just something to relook at, please. And maybe Paul has some ideas that he can help you with. Otherwise, that's all I would have on it. Good and that. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Tom. I think I was going to have the question, do they vote on your appointment or not? And you answered that by saying they had voted against you. So I guess that answers the question that they vote. And I thought that was the original intent of the owner communities would be those people that select the members of the commission. So in that sense, I think you're correct that they would be included. It was probably just an oversight because they don't serve a bill. They don't get any bill, but they are part of the territory. Okay, does anybody else have any comments?
This is Commissioner Foster.
Go ahead, Grant.
Thanks. And yeah, I wasn't going to raise that point, but in generally, I think this is really good. I think that point is, in my understanding, just a reflection of the fact that the appointing authority and what I think we may be otherwise thinking of owners is very, very closely aligned, but not perfectly. So I don't know if it's worth, getting into the nuance of it, but I think there are communities that technically have at least a say in appointment today that aren't, I think in other regards, co-owners of the district. So, again, I think it's a very small slice where that isn't aligned, and perhaps it's just easiest to use the appointing authority as a proxy for it. But I think if we're going to be really precise and technical, I think our ownership is, I think, more about owners of sanitary systems that are part of this sort of collaborative. So, I don't have strong feelings about needing to get into the weeds on that, but I guess I would just point out that especially before the changes were made in the statute as it relates to appointing authority, I think it was maybe more clear then. We had owners back at that time, even when the appointing authority was the county and county executive. And clearly then there was a much greater mismatch between appointing authority and ownership. Again, it's sort of been mostly aligned now with the new statute and how that is. But I think technically, at least in my understanding, appointing authority isn't precisely ownership. And I think that's the town of Middleton is maybe one example of that.
Okay, so what you're suggesting is the town of Middleton is an example that even though they make an appointment, they're not necessarily an owner community because they don't get any service from the district. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think like technically there are small portions of, I think like the town of Burke also are within the service area, and as such are one of the towns that, you know, gets to participate as well per the statute, but again are not, you know, they don't have a sanitary system that is part of the, you know, MMSD. So I think there, you know, I don't know if there may be other examples like that. And, you know, again, the difference is very, very slight, but I think if in some ways, to me, the definition of the owner community really is about municipalities that have sewer utilities that are part of the MMSD is really, I think, the true owner, and the appointment authority, again, can be a reasonable proxy, but it's not precisely the same thing.
Okay, well, thanks, Grant. I think, Tom, I have a question for you. Does the town of Burke vote on your appointment? Do you recall?
I do not remember.
Okay, so that is a valid point that town of Burke probably has some sewer. Now, town of Burke and town of Madison will be going away in a few years.
Yeah.
So this will get smaller.
Well,
but I think
there's sewer in Blooming Grove, you know.
Right,
You know,
Blooming Grove too, right.
Maybe we're looking at semantics, and we should look at the ones that have the utility district, but that's, you know, either way, I think you've got the owner communities defined in an acceptable way. It's just a matter of maybe Paul or somebody looking at that statute and seeing how it's been interpreted. And it was listed 200.09 sub 11. So again, I just wanted to point it out, and now we've had Grant pointed out, just something to look at. I would rather have it the communities that actually operate a system, you know. But then again, I think that's something we probably want to look at.
Well, I think since this is the whole definition of customer communities is what drew us onto this item, I think we should try to settle it and give them the direction. So, Bill, could you go back to that screen where you had the definition? So we would, under Grant and potentially what Tom is tending to agree with, instead of saying owner communities are municipalities with the authority, we'd say owner communities are municipalities with an operating system within the district. So does that make, you know, or some wordsmithing of that, obviously. So Michael, Paul, and other commissioners, do you have any opinion on that?
This is Michael. I'm thinking, I don't know actually what the implications of that change would be. And just sitting here right now, and we would have to look at all the operating systems and see where there's overlap and where there are what's being missed, unless Bill knows offhand what that would be. So that might be. Go ahead, Bill.
I do not know offhand. I'm going to toss 3 points out here to maybe help the discussion a little bit. One, remember the goal of this is to help you know who you're prioritizing. Number 2, remember Commissioner Wilson's point, regardless of what you write here, towns within our service area can control who the commission is, or at least influence it. And number 3, there can be, at least in principle, governments and other organizations that receive sewer service from us who are not municipalities.
Right. So what's the commission's thoughts? Do we keep it owner communities as defined, which would and technically then include the town of Middleton, perhaps the town of Burke, maybe another 1 or 2, or Blooming Grove? well, the Blooming Grove system, I think, is all operated by Madison, but it's in Blooming Grove. So we'd have to
So
find
is-
out
so is
who actually
Middleton's.
votes on Tom's, the town position, or do we change it to just have those that have service or utility districts that are served by the district? So I'd like to hear.
Yeah, this is Brad Murphy. I think that the town of Middleton has land that is currently located in the town that is served by sewer. I think it's maybe it's operated by the city of Madison, but the land is still in the township. And the same may be true of Blooming Grove and the town of Burke and other townships where the city of Madison or other municipalities have taken over those systems, but the land is still in the township. And you know, in my way of thinking, I think the way that the global outcome policy is written is fine. And I think if those communities are currently within the district, if they have land that is being served by sanitary sewer service, regardless of who operates the system, I'm not sure that that's critically important to how the policy is written. So I think it's okay with me.
Hey, thanks, Brad. Anybody else have opinion?
Yeah, it's okay with me too, Tom. I just think we need to check that. You know, and that may be a Paul question, but you know, I agree with the way this is written and just wanted to raise it and let it simmer.
Okay, it's actually makes the easiest way to do it, I think, is the way they've done it. So anybody else have any comments?
And this is Paul. I certainly could weigh in, but I think 2 points to get back first to Bill's point. This is really not as much of a statutory interpretation as it is a policy guidance for the commission. And so I think it is first and foremost important for how, you know, the commission is comfortable, and it sounds like you're comfortable with it as proposed. I guess the other observation I would have is that, you know, under the current statute and really even under the former statute, there was never a perfect alignment between the appointing authority and those communities that were served. I mean, we have that now, but I mean, frankly, when it was Dane County that did the appointments and the county exec, you know, there are obviously places in Dane County that were not served by the district. So there isn't a perfect overlap there. I think that means that really you could do this either way, but I think that the way that is being proposed here, you know, certainly is an appropriate way to do it if that's what the commission wants to do.
Okay, thanks, Paul.
President Hubble, this is Commissioner Meyer. I might just weigh in quick to say, I mean, these are illuminating, you know, points from Tom Wilson and others. To my mind, though, what they mean for us is good job to Bill and everybody on the global outcomes policy proposal. It works. Maybe as Bill and others on staff look at how the CED interpretation document would shape up, they're going to look at a couple of these really nuanced cases like the town of Middleton and the town of Burke, and they're going to decide whether those belong on that list or not. But that's how I'm reading this. It does not go back to any necessary changes in the policy proposal. It just goes to that staff interpretation and making sure we don't leave anybody out where we might ruffle some feathers or get it wrong a little bit on the way statutes work or that sort of thing.
Okay, Ezra, thank you. So
Commissioner Foster?
Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I don't think the actual result is super significant, so I'm not going to object to anything here. But yeah, I guess one thing I would offer is I do, you know, and I did kind of go back and read through the statute a few times, and I pulled it up again during this conversation, and I think, you know, Bill's point about the sort sort of appointing authority, I think is a good one in real terms, in terms of creating the district and also, dissolution of the district, which I don't think anyone's anticipating, but it really does specifically reference and define us as a collection of other sewer utilities. And, there are references to sort of the municipalities itself, and obviously in the newest version of the appointing authority, it gives that to the municipality itself. But I mean, my understanding of who we are is really a collective of sewer utilities that are, I think often or always in our case, operated by municipalities. And I think it would be equally coherent and clear to just, instead of saying appointing authority, to say the sewer utilities. And I think it addresses some of the points that came up, where there are, land that's technically part of, let's say, town of Burke. The reason it's in our service area and the impact is that it's served by the Madison sewer utility. And so in terms of our our old framing customer or in our new framing owner community, I mean, I think it actually, in my mind, is better to think about the sewer utility itself as our sort of owner or primary stakeholder, partner, et cetera, more so than the municipality, because the decisions that we're making, et cetera, for those few parcels that are town of Burke, but serviced by a Madison sewer utility, I mean, our touch point is with the Madison sewer utility, and the changes that we make, the charges, all those things, while they might affect a resident that's technically in a township, and while that township might theoretically or technically has a voice in the appointing process, I don't think that, we don't really have a direct relationship with the town of Burke. Our relationship is with the Madison sewer utility, which has a relationship with the town of Burke, more so, I think, than us directly, even in spite of the appointing authority. So I guess just in terms of, and I appreciate what was said, this is really more about how we're understanding it. For me, I think thinking about our most direct and primary customer or stakeholder or partner as the actual utilities that is our composition, to me just does feel more clear. And so I guess I would be in favor of moving in that direction.
Okay, well, do you want to make a motion to amend to change?
Sure,
it to
yep, I would do that.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Foster to amend the policy, the definition of owner community to be those that have sewer utilities that are served by the district. Do we have a second to that motion?
I'm happy to second it for the purpose of discussion. This is Commissioner Meyer.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Foster, second by Commissioner Meyer to amend the definition of owner community to be sanitary districts that are served or by the district. So we've heard Grant's point. Anybody else have any points they wish to make?
President Hubble, a clarifying sort of question. I'm just going to think out loud a little bit. What I think I hear Grant proposing is a two-part test to be an owner community under his proposed definition. The entity is a municipality with authority to appoint, and they maintain a sewer utility that is served by the district. I think it's those two things. You can't be a sewer utility but not an appointing authority, nor the opposite. You have to be both. Grant, does that sound right to you? Am I tracking with what you're suggesting?
Yeah, Ezra, I guess I don't think we need to make any mention of the appointing authority, and my recommendation is just to leave it out. I don't think it's possible to be an owner of a sewer utility without that in the current statute. And I guess, I would so looking at chapter 200, 5.5 in this sort of the section that's talking about the formation, I think there it uses a term that might be helpful for us. It's talking about how the district can be created and the process to do that. And it talks about a municipality which jointly or separately owns or operates a sewerage collection and disposal system. So that's that's sort of who has a say even in the beginning to whether we create one or not. That's also referenced again in the case that there was a dissolution of the district. It's really talking not just about municipalities that happen to have land that's in the area, but municipalities that jointly or separately own or operate a sewage collection and disposal system that is now connected with MMSD. So I think that's what I would recommend is the definition. And in the case of the current statute, the appointing authority includes all of those, and just does include a little bit more that's not those actual what I would consider owners.
Okay, anyone else want to weigh in before we vote on the amendment?
Let's throw one other sort of fuzzy part that's catching me a little bit. That we have these places where there's a sanitary district, this sort of quasi-governmental entity that operates within a town, and we collect sewage from those areas. But I worry that gets really fuzzy if this language isn't clear enough. That gets really fuzzy whether we're including those folks and those places into this definition, which I don't think we mean to do. But that's why I'm coming at it from this two-part test that to me would probably most laser-like focus in on what I think you're looking to do, Grant. But it's just my off the cuff thinking.
Ezra, does
what you proposed or what you presented today?
Does the definition that I just read address that, so that so essentially there is a two-part test in that it has to be a municipality and a municipality that jointly or separately owns the system. So if there were a system that were, it's a municipality which owns a system is the sort of two-part test, just keeping the appointing authorities part out of it.
Okay, so there's what I'm hearing, a friendly amendment to have a two-part test that you have to be a municipality, and the municipality has to own a utility system that's served by the district. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So do we have anybody else that wants to make a comment before we vote on this amendment with the friendly amendment for the two-part test?
This is Sarah. I would love any feedback from Bill or Michael on this. My hesitation is in the conversation that we had a couple weeks ago around appointing authority being so critical to accountability for commissioners in our decision making. And I think we are perhaps being almost like too precise in getting at that in this conversation in the proposed amendment, but I'm really interested in Bill or Michael. You've thought about this a lot. Any feedback for you have for us as a commission in considering this proposal?
Who's going to go first? I have one comment. It doesn't. I have two comments. Speaking personally for myself, the clarity of appointing authority is very attractive. Whether it is to the commission or not is up to you. A second comment, which I think is relevant. So far, the discussion has been about literal sewer service provision. We're moving water around and treating it. There's another aspect of our relationship with communities, and that is expansion of the system, broadly considered. And I'm thinking of a town that does not run a utility, yet is served by us, indirectly, say town of Middleton. There's still an issue of that town expanding or new areas being developed and us charging them connection charges for that, us considering them in our planning. And you might want to incorporate that aspect of our relationship with communities in your discussion.
I was going to add, we also have another layer of specificity, which is our sewer use ordinance, and which goes into much more detail and addresses this issue of sewer utilities served in terms of how we develop rules and requirements for sewer systems that are connected to the system. And so that's really where we have the relationship with every sewer system that's connected to us, is through the sewer use ordinance. The policy book is really our ability to provide really good alignment between just when it's all said and done, who are we creating tiers of ownership and engagement. So when we get to those points of setting policy, who takes priority, and so that's a bit of a distinction, but I think it's worth considering.
Okay, thank you, Bill and Michael. Any other commissioners have any thoughts? Would we wish to postpone this for a couple weeks to get a kind of a second written idea?
Yeah, I was
what
going
it
to
would look like?
recommend that as well, and just ask, just to kind of think through the implications. I don't think there's any urgency on it right now, and I mean, it would be better, I think, just to take a little bit of pause and make sure that that potential change wouldn't have any unintended consequences.
Okay, so what we'll
Wilson,
do
I'm
is,
good with that.
Yep. So do we need a formal motion to table, or can we just can I just ask that we defer this to a future meeting and the staff can give more thought and draft up a secondary idea that competes with the first one that we saw today, and then we can consider it at a future meeting. It might not necessarily be the next meeting, but depending on how the length of the agenda. So is that okay with everybody? We just defer that rather than getting a formal motion to table?
Sure.
Commissioner Clark, yes.
Okay. So we'll do that.
President Hubble, we will have to reflect that we do have a motion and a second on the
Right.
table
We have a
still.
motion and a second.
And so if we defer, that's going to be our starting point.
That's correct. But what we're going to be doing is coming back with a drafted document that takes in what the amended motion is, so we have something written to look at.
Well, unless that's withdrawn.
Unless it's withdrawn, right. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Do we want to keep the motion in a second, or would you wish to withdraw it at this point and start anew with the two documents at a future meeting?
Yeah, I think it'd be cleaner to withdraw it myself, but either way.
I guess I would prefer, if it's on the table right now, I would just refer this item to a future meeting and we just pick it up where we left off. And then if we want to, vote down that amendment or handle it there, I guess that would be my preference.
Okay, so we'll just keep it the way it is and pick up with the amendment, which will be drafted so everybody has something visual that they can see and we can compare it, the two of them, and then it'll also give a chance for staff and commission members to think through any implications that they wish to bring up. Okay, so given
that's what we'll do, President Hubble. Then with this amendment, we could have two options for the commission to consider and be able to compare the key considerations of both and give us a little bit more time to evaluate it.
Correct. Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. I think it was a very good discussion. That after all, this is what brought us to consider what are our customer community, what are our customers, and so I think it will give us a good choice as to how we wish to define that. So that will take us to item number 7. Michael, you have the CED update.
Yes, President Hubble, I have 2 items today. One, with COVID-19, we experienced our first 2 positive cases at the district. And as we looked at contact tracing, an entire work group was potentially exposed and are on 14-day quarantine. And so we've been evaluating the work and how we're going to get the work done with a team out of service. The second item is DNR interest-based problem solving for looking at the extended disinfection season. We have scheduled our first meeting with the DNR between the district and the DNR for November 17th. So it's a ways out, and we're very close to locking in the second meeting. So those are the two things that are going on. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you unless there are questions from the commission.
Okay, any questions from the commission? Michael, I had a question for you. Was the two cases, that's in addition to the case that was earlier in the COVID situation that we had, that one person that had tested positive early on?
These are two new cases.
Two new cases, so they're currently ongoing. Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else have any other questions? Okay, just a note that it was on the agenda that I was reappointed by the Cities and Villages Association at their meeting last week. I don't know that anybody else wanted to serve, so came back. Paul,
Glad to have you,
regulatory.
Tom. We're definitely glad to have you.
Yay.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Tom.
Thank you. Paul Kent, you want to do the regulatory and legal review?
Sure, and it's in your packet. I just want to highlight two things, both of which relate to PFAS. One is that this emergency rule, which is NR 159 on firefighting foam, it was before the Natural Resources Board in September. There were some, or actually August, there were some objections. Public comments were received in September, so it will be going back to the Natural Resources Board for their October meeting later this month. I think the important thing for us is that they clarified that the standards that are going to be used for essentially remedial action kinds of situations for firefighting foam are not effluent standards under Chapter 283. So it doesn't create an implication that the standards for this would be the standards applied to us. That gets us to the other item I wanted to highlight, which is that the rulemaking on surface water and groundwater standards is continuing. The next stage in this is this economic impact analysis. The department indicated that they would be taking samples of selected wastewater treatment plants throughout the state this fall to try and determine what current discharge levels are so as to better evaluate the economic impact analysis of a surface water standard. So that will, it's not clear whether the district will be asked to do that, but obviously the work that Marty is doing, we're in a better position than most to cooperate if the department wishes to do that. So those are kind of the major two highlights, but I'd be glad to answer any questions if anybody has them.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Paul? Thank you very much, Paul.
Yep, you bet.
Okay, I don't see anything or hear anything. So Marty, you want to give an update on the biosolids management study?
Yes, I can. Let me get this screen sharing working here. So thanks, Commissioner Hubble. I'm just going to do a quick update on our biosolids management study. And so what I'm going to do is just quickly give a short recap as to the purpose of the study, what we're hoping to learn, and then give an update on where we're at with the study, what we've learned so far, and then a little preview as to what we might see as some of the results of the study. So this is sort of a preview to bring you all along, since the last time I believe we talked about this was over 9 months ago. And we expect the study to be completed by the end of the year. So we'll be coming back to you with some of the suggested recommendations and having more discussion on how the district moves forward with managing biosolids. So this is the beginning of one of a few conversations on this. So just a little history of our biosolids program. In the 1930s, the district, was very innovative in looking for ways to improve management of biosolids, and we did air drying on sand drying beds. And so we bagged this product and sold it as fertilizer. So we started selling our product as fertilizer in the 1930s, and it was called nitro humus. And it was a pretty labor-intensive process. So in the 40s, with the Depression era, we had a labor shortage, and so there was the use of the lagoon storages became put into play, and that's where we started crafting a longer-term biosolids management approach. And so in the 70s, we started looking at alternatives to lagoons because the lagoons were starting to cause us problems. And so that was the first time the commission actually looked at specific reporting and did some studies. So in the mid 70s, that's when we decided to switch from using lagoons as a storage alternative to doing land application. And we thought that at the time that would be the most cost-effective way to manage biosolids. And so moving into the mid 70s and into the 80s, we refined this land application program, and we made a commitment to liquid biosolids and agricultural land. And so we put it as part of our facilities planning. And so we designed the MetroGrow program. So the MetroGrow program, as we know it now, pretty much started late 70s, early 80s. And since the MetroGrow program has been in effect since the 80s, we've looked at the biosolids program 3 times. We looked at it at the late 80s, looking at, is this still the right thing to do? And the decision at that point was we could thicken better, and so we can reduce our biosolid volume so we'd still be okay with the land application program. In the early mid 90s, we did another evaluation and found that, we wanted to make sure we had 180 days of storage. And so that was when we specifically took all the lagoons offline with our restorations and wetland restorations and built our 3 storage tanks. So the tanks were completed in the mid 90s. And the last time we looked at biosolids was in the early 2000s. And that was when we said, liquid land application is still the way we want to go, but we want to look at alternative solutions. And that's when we started looking at digestion process changes to start creating Class A biosolids. I've talked about Class A biosolids in the past. And that's in the mid 2000s. That's when we started looking at this Class A cake product mixing with sawdust, and we kind of call that Metro Mix. And some of you on the commission may have heard that term Metro Mix. So that was a Class A product mixed with sawdust. And so at that time in the mid 2000s, we thought the idea was to take this Metro Mix product and ramp it up, and that would be in our portfolio for fertilizer to be about 25% of our district fertilizer production by 2010. That clearly didn't happen for various reasons. One of the reasons was while the testing of the mix showed that agronomically yields would not be impacted, how it worked with the cropping systems and how farmers operated in our area, it didn't quite fit. So we were still trying to refine that. And that's where we find ourselves today. And so a couple of the other challenges that I want to kind of outline before I go into some of the solutions is why we even look at this. I gave a little history of where we're at, but why should we even look again if liquid application is the way to go? Well, the first challenge that we're looking at to sort of get a handle on is nutrients. And so through our agricultural land application program, we are regulated by the department when it comes to nutrients. And so that does put operational challenges in place for us. We also have customers who also have an emphasis on nutrients, and they're also regulated to nutrients, our farming customers. And so they also have challenges and pressures to be able to control and manage their nutrients. And then of course, we're in the Yahara watershed where there's a TMDL in place, We have Yahara winds to help address water quality issues. And so there's another focus on nutrients specifically in our service area for that reason. And so even though we've been proactive in addressing our nutrient issues, we want to make sure that through our biosolids practices, our biosolids management, that we're doing our part as well. And so to make sure we're doing it now, currently, we've had to increase hauling distances to make sure that we're not over applying on certain acres. But when it comes to nutrients, we want to make sure we're taking a holistic approach and make sure that we're using nutrients correctly and putting them in the right place. So looking at how we manage nutrients as part of our biosolids management is important to do. The other challenge is soil health. As we have a large volume of farming customers for our land application program, their main concern is the soil health. And so, you know, if you look at a farming cycle, you look at the spring before you put your seed in the ground, you want to make sure the soil is healthy, has fertilizer in it to help those seeds grow. And our program is machinery intensive, very, very heavy machinery. And so there is concern about the health of the soil when it comes to compaction and using our machinery to apply fertilizer. And even though we have tried to mitigate some of these concerns through our spring yield guarantee program by actually incentivizing farmers to hold fields open and allow us to place fertilizer on their farm fields, it's not a long-term sustainable solution. So the way the soil is affected with the way our operations work isn't important for our customers. And the other thing I'll bring up about soil health is that directly related to nutrients. We know in our particular area, because nutrients are a focus, soil health is also a focus. And the cropping practices in terms of tillage, tilling, moving the earth and soil is something that a lot of farmers in our area are really conscious of, and they want less tillage, less movement of the earth. The less soil you move around, the less chance of nutrient runoff. And in our particular machinery, is not a low till situation. It actually tills up the earth because we need to make sure we subsurface inject our liquid MetroGrow equipment product. So we need to have equipment that works with our farmers' needs for tilling and cropping purposes, especially as it relates to soil health. The other challenge that our program is facing is obviously land use. There's less agricultural land available within a radius of the plant that makes it cost effective to haul the volume of material that we need. We've determined that we have about a 30 to 35 mile radius where hauling essentially liquid and water is very heavy, becomes non-cost effective. So as land use changes within our cost effective radius, it makes it challenging to find more acres to get our material out. The other aspect of this is this increase in urbanization. A lot of local townships around their area become very strict on the use of heavy trucks on roads. So it becomes harder to find actually routes, efficient routes to actually get to the locations where we're able to land apply. And so the transportation when it comes to land use is an interesting challenge that we want to use the biosolids management study to actually look at. So the study will look at, if there's operational challenges, trucking challenges, transportation challenges, how could different alternatives to liquid influence sort of that type of transportation and distribution. And finally, the last challenge is climate change and weather. And so as we all know, we talked about the budget earlier, and we've been talking about it for a while. We had big weather problems last fall that actually impacted the budget when it came to the management of our biosolids. And so we have increased precipitation, more rain events. It basically shortens our application window because we're an agricultural product. We go on the land and we need the land to be in a proper environmental state for us to work on it. And if that's not the case, then we can't actually land apply. So it basically creates a situation where we're tasked with completing the same amount of work. We still have the same volume to land apply, but we have a very small window of time and actually to do that. So understanding the alternatives to biosolid land application or products could give us a more flexible distribution base that would be maybe less dependent on weather or specific field conditions. So moving on to the study goals, as we have now sort of our challenges in front of us as to what we want the the study to account for and give us alternatives to help combat those challenges. We want to take a balanced approach. And so we're looking at all different aspects of our operations, whether it's cost, I talked about transportation, and we're sort of looking at all these different drivers to help us gather the data. So the first thing we do is look at the drivers and say, okay, here are the things that are causing our challenges, and we list them out. And this isn't a full comprehensive list that you're seeing on the screen. This is just an example of some of the drivers. And I gave you a short summary of some of those drivers a few minutes ago. And after we look at the drivers, we say, okay, we know this is going to drive us to certain solutions, but which of these actually will be the easiest for us to integrate into what we're doing at the district? We don't want to come up with solutions that would make us build a whole new something or make it harder for us to deal with. We have a specific digestion and biosolids creation process, and yes, we can tweak and modify and change those, but there's a continuum of which operational changes become more challenging than helpful. The other thing we want to make sure we look at is, as we look at our alternatives, we want to take the drivers, and if it's feasible, and say, okay, what are the options that fit into those? Like, what are the options that are going to hit our drivers, our interests? What are the options that are actually feasible for us? And so now those are actually the alternatives we want to focus on. And once we get those alternatives we want to focus on, that's when we're able to then look at our triple bottom line analysis to determine which of the products are going to be the most complementary for the district and our interests. So the idea is at the end of the day, we're going to have some type of roadmap. And again, this is not a specific roadmap that we've created. This is a visual example, but the idea is that we have a final roadmap that's flexible, that gives us a plan in the short term, a 3 to 5 year window that tells us, okay, what do we need for infrastructure? What are we going to need for product? And sort of map out our path. And the idea is that on this path, it can be flexible to say over time, if different drivers occur or different interests sort of pop up that we're unaware of, the regulatory driver could be one of those, we can continue to adapt and change and continue on a path to have a sustainable management program. The idea here is that we want to make sure we're spending our money in the correct places and at the right time and where it makes sense. So where are we at? We've completed the first task, and that was identifying, what are the needs of our users? What's going on with our current program? How are we handling our data? Our current program assessment, what's good, what's bad, how are we doing it, and how does it work? So we looked at that. That was the first thing we looked at. We completed that, and then we got some very interesting results that I'll be happy to share at a later date. The next task we had to do was say, okay, I talked about the goals and drivers. Those are our needs, right? What do we need to do? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we approach that before I move on to the final task, which is, what are the solutions? How are we going to recommend how we move forward? So how did we look at these goals and drivers? The first thing we looked at is, again, with the drivers. I listed them all earlier. I'm just putting them back up here on the screen so you can see them again. So we have our drivers, right? What we wanted to know is, okay, how do our drivers really connect to what the district wants to do, what's important to the district, which is our district strategic plan? And the idea is, if we can link to our strategic plan, we can sort of give a timing aspect to how each of these drivers could impact the management of biosolids. For instance, if you remember our strategic plan, we have it broken up into different time horizons with different sort of phases of where we're at with different strategies. So we have influencing factors, priorities, and things like that. And so that sort of gives us a sense of, okay, where on this continuum is important, and where in this continuum are we at in terms of time that we can actually address these drivers. And then the third thing we did was say, okay, what type of driver is it? Is it something we have to deal with on a regulatory aspect? Is it something that we have to deal with on what the end user wants? Because those are two important things. We have to really tailor our program to say, we have a product that we have a user, they want to use it, but also at the end of the day, those other interests I talked about, there's a lot of regulatory component to that. So how do those two things fit into the drivers we're looking at, but also the time horizon through our strategic plan? And so as we look at those two things together, it'll help us get to a plan that really gets us a 3 to 5 time horizon window, but also the driver for what we want our end use product to actually be. So how are we actually going to try to put this all together? Again, the next pictures you're going to see on these slides are for illustrative purposes. The idea is not to be able to read all the words. The idea is just to sort of see visually how we're going to address this. So when we're looking at our considerations for non-economic criteria, we're sort of looking at a matrix of questions. And these questions that you see along the top directly relate to those interests and drivers I talked about before. For instance, one of those questions that you can't read is, does the product improve soil health, right? And those types of questions. And our first step is to look at our interests and our drivers, and how does that connect to our envision criteria? How do each of these drivers say what's important for us when we look at our envision criteria, which is a way to look at non-economic benefits, for instance, quality of life, the natural world, climate change, and things like that. So we can sort of get a sense of, wow, some of our interests and drivers really lean heavy on this type of envision criteria, or lean heavy on another type of criteria. And that's information that we can use in the future when we do our triple bottom line analysis. The next step is to then sort of compare those options and give us a score. And we want to say, for instance, on the left side here, you're seeing on the screen, we're looking at those questions, those interests. Does it impact soil health? That was the example I gave before. But now we're sort of give a weight to that, and we say, okay, if we look at this particular product, is it score high in impact to soil health or low to impact to soil health? And we can get this big chart built up, right, based upon all of our options. So the options are across the top, and these sort of evaluation matrix are along the left side. And as we get this filled out, then we can even have more information about how these different biosolids management options affect those drivers and those interests that we talked about. We also want to make sure we can assign a weight to those. So again, this is just illustrating that if you have this big matrix of different comparisons, well, which comparison is more important than the other? So we can assign weights to those sort of evaluation metrics. And we can use the information from our comparison to the envision criteria to help inform what some of those weights might look like. So once we do all that, we get our products, we do our evaluation, we say, okay, what does this mean? How are we going to actually turn this into something actionable? Well, the interesting thing is that you can take these scores and you can sort of stack them against one another. So the visualization you're seeing here right now is just an example of how we can sort of color code some of those boxes, those intersections on that chart matrix I showed earlier, and say, okay, you know, the soil health example I gave, maybe that really affected certain criteria more than others. And so you had a lot more orange, so to speak, if that was the color we assigned to soil health. And so you can look at the different alternatives of how we manage our biosolids and say, wow, it's really easy to say orange is what I want to go for. That's, you know, for instance, environmental impact, or blue is a financial impact. And you can sort of see how these options stack up or weight against one another. And as we have a bunch of these sort of stacked bars of colors, we can take these, and that's what really is going to feed into our triple bottom line analysis, right? And so we can look at, if we're focusing on one aspect of triple bottom line, we can look at how the stacks play out. If we look at another aspect, we can see how they compare to one another. And the hope is that this will help us give a clear way to evaluate what the different options are, so we can determine as a district what's most important to our interests and our drivers, and pick the recommendation options that work for us. So with that, I will end the presentation. And there was a lot to take in, but it was just basically a quick summary. And so you sort of know the path we're on of how we're sort of doing this evaluation. So when I do finally come with the recommendations, you understand a little bit of how the sausage is made. And I will, of course, recap again, but just kind of bringing you all along. So if there are any questions now, I'm happy to answer them. But this is mainly for y'all to have an update and to just have some information. And so when I present this again with the rest of the information from the study, it won't be foreign. So thanks.
Okay, well, thank you, Marty. That's a lot of detail. Does anybody have any questions? I have one thought I want to provide, but I'll ask for any questions first. Okay, hearing none. One of my thoughts, Michael, this could be a really momentous kind of, I don't know what the study's going to come up with, but obviously it could be something significant for the district. So this will be a study session, I believe. And do you have the date set for that?
Marty, go ahead.
We were gonna set the date for that after we actually got the final report. So we haven't gotten it yet, but we can certainly try to plug it in and we can move it if necessary.
My main thing is I would think that this almost ought to be like the topic for, it's almost like its own meeting. Get rid of maybe other light business that we have to do, like the consent calendar, but try to keep the meeting, because this I'm not sure what's going to come out of it, but it could generate a great deal of discussion, because there's things that you were mentioning today that I had not really heard of before, like the equipment and soil compaction, which makes sense. But then when you take a look at large dairy farms, they basically use the same type of equipment to inject their waste. That's just kind of my thought on this, is to make sure that it's kind of basically like it's the main agenda item for whatever meeting it's put on. Is that possible?
Yes, that is possible. And it will likely be more than one session. Usually with policy, we start with a summary of the options and considerations, and then we come back and drill down a little bit. But I think our goal is not to come to the commission with a big, huge matrix of things, but getting to the point. I think what Marty's sharing with you is what we at the staff level are using to distill the options to the 3 or 5 that have the most opportunity, and looking at and weighing those.
Okay. Well, I like knowing, like you said, how the sausage is made, and that'll be important for us. But I'm just thinking this could be a big change of course from current direction of the district that's possible. So it's going to take a lot of thought, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion. Okay, well, thank you very much, Marty. It was very informative. That takes us to the future meeting schedule, which is in, and then our next meeting is the 29th of October. Any future agenda topics or other business? If not, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, we do. Mr. Wilson here.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Wilson, second by
Commissioner Clark.
Commissioner Clark. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? None. Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon and rest of the day.
Likewise.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay
Thank you,
healthy.
Tom.